TNG introduced Picard's clone 12 years before Star Trek Nemesis. Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, briefly had a clone on Star Trek The Next Generation long before Shinzon Tom Hardy appeared in Star Trek Nemesis. The final TNG film saw the crew of the USS Enterprise E face off against Shinzon after he took control of the Romulan Empire. The Romulans created a clone of Picard to act as a spy within the Federation, but they soon abandoned the project and sent Shinzon to a remand labor camp. Shinzon later rebelled against the Romulan Empire and made plans to attack the United Federation of Planets. Despite their shared DNA, Star Trek Nemesis's villainous Shinzon bears little resemblance to Jean-Luc Picard in everything apart from his appearance. Where Jean-Luc is compassionate, curious, and open-minded, Shinzon is cruel, selfish, and cannot see past his own desire for revenge. Captain Picard had previously encountered duplicate versions of himself twice on Star Trek The Next Generation. In TNG Season 2, Episode 13, Time Squared, Picard met a version of himself from 6 hours in the future, but the more interesting doppelganger came in TNG Season 3, Episode 18, Allegiance. Picard's TNG clone shows why the real Jean-Luc is great in Star Trek The Next Generation's Allegiance. Captain Picard wakes up in a strange prison cell with 4 strangers, while a doppelganger takes over his position on the USS Enterprise D. It doesn't take long for Commander William Riker, Jonathan Frakes, and the Enterprise crew to grow suspicious of this replacement Picard as he begins behaving strangely. The real Picard, however, soon proves why he makes such a great starship captain. Picard immediately assesses his situation, questioning the other prisoners and exploring his surroundings. Picard helps the others stay calm, encouraging these very different people to work together to find a way out of their situation. Captain Picard attempts to communicate with his captors to no avail, and eventually deduces that one of the prisoners is not who they claim to be. Picard remains calm throughout the ordeal, even after he realizes that the entire setup has been an experiment. Picard gets the aliens to reveal themselves, and they tell him they captured the prisoners to study the concepts of hierarchy and authority. The aliens then return with Picard to the Enterprise, where he uses nonverbal cues to subtly direct his officers to imprison the aliens. This scene not only shows what an effective Captain Picard is, but also demonstrates the trust he and his crew have in one another. Picard's clone shows Jean-Luc's emotional side better than Star Trek Nemesis's Shinzon, because aliens created an exact replica of Captain Picard, including his memories. Jean-Luc's clone reveals a lot about the way the captain thinks. The clone expresses worry to Counselor Deanna Troi, Marina Sirtis, that his crew will lose faith in him. Picard's double joins the crew for their poker game, leads a rousing musical number in 10 Forward, and expresses romantic feelings for Dr. Beverly Crusher, Gates McFadden. While all of these things are out of character for the real Picard, they are not so far out of character to be impossible. This suggests that Picard has thought about joining the poker game, has contemplated his feelings for Dr. Crusher, and occasionally doubts himself. While Captain Picard's singing seems the most unlike him, he enjoys performing theater and had a wild streak in his youth. So it's not that difficult to imagine him thinking about this scenario. The difference is that the real Captain Picard does not act on these thoughts. Because Star Trek Nemesis's Shinzon was raised completely differently from Picard, he develops into an entirely different person. The real Jean-Luc would never even contemplate doing many of the things that Shinzon does, making the clone in Star Trek The Next Generation's Allegiance not only more realistic, but also much more revealing. In the vast universe of Star Trek, characters are continually developed and explored, often in complex and unexpected ways. One such twist in character development came in Star Trek Nemesis, when Captain Jean-Luc Picard's clone, Shinzon, was introduced as the film's primary antagonist. While Nemesis 2002 is typically credited with the reveal of Picard's clone, a fascinating piece of Star Trek history suggests that the concept of a duplicate Jean-Luc Picard was actually introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation, TNG, long before the events of Nemesis. In fact, an episode in the 3rd season of TNG titled The Enemy hinted at the existence of a Picard clone, laying the conceptual groundwork for the twist a full 12 years before Shinzon ever appeared. Setting the stage, The Enemy, TNG Season 3. The episode The Enemy, which aired in 1989 during TNG's 3rd season, is a classic example of the show's exploration of diplomacy, prejudice, and moral dilemmas. The plot revolves around the Enterprise crew encountering a Romulan scout ship that has crashed on the hostile planet of Galorndon Core. The Geordi Lawforge becomes stranded on the planet and must cooperate with a Romulan officer, despite their mutual distrust, to survive. While the primary focus of the enemy is on the fragile relationship between the Federation and the Romulans, one key subplot introduces a medical revelation that resonates deeply with Jean-Luc Picard. The Enterprise crew takes another Romulan survivor aboard, who needs an immediate blood transfusion to survive. Dr. Beverly Crusher is unable to find a suitable match among the crew, but she discovers that the Romulan shares a rare genetic trait with Captain Picard himself. This revelation surprises Picard, as it suggests that Romulans and humans, or at least this particular Romulan, have genetic similarities that could be explored further. While the episode does not explicitly present this Romulan as a clone of Picard, the unusual genetic connection subtly sets the stage for what would become the central premise of Nemesis, the existence of a genetic duplicate of Jean-Luc Picard created by the Romulans. This shared genetic history introduces the idea of Picard's DNA being used or replicated in some way, a plot point that is later fully realized in Nemesis with the introduction of Shinzon, the clone engineered by the Romulans. Shinzon and Picard. A dark reflection. When Star Trek Nemesis was released in 2002, it presented Shinzon, portrayed by Tom Hardy, as Picard's clone and a product of a Romulan plot to replace the captain with a doppelganger. However, this plan was abandoned early in Shinzon's life, and he was cast aside, left to grow up among the Remans, a subjugated race within the Romulan Empire. Unlike Picard, who became a symbol of diplomacy, honor, and leadership within the Federation, Shinzon was raised in darkness, learning cruelty and bitterness as a result of his circumstances. Shinzon represents the idea of nature versus nurture within the Star Trek universe. Although he shares the same DNA as Picard, his experiences lead him down a vastly different path. Where Picard is measured, disciplined, and principled, Shinzon is vengeful and ruthless. This dichotomy explores the question of how much of a person's identity is shaped by their genetic makeup versus their environment. For Picard, Shinzon is more than just an adversary. He is a chilling reflection of what Picard might have become had his life followed a darker trajectory. The bond between the two characters is not just physical, but philosophical, as both grapple with questions of identity, morality, and fate. Shinzon's ambition to destroy the Federation and seize power stems from a deep-seated desire to overcome his perceived inferiority to the man he was cloned from, a man who had everything Shinzon was denied. The legacy of the Picard clone, while Nemesis may have provided the most direct exploration of Picard's genetic duplicate, the foundation laid by TNG, especially in episodes like The Enemy, demonstrates that the idea of cloning and genetic manipulation had been present in Star Trek for quite some time. The Romulans, as a species known for their secrecy and ambition, were established as having a keen interest in espionage, infiltration, and biological experimentation. It is fitting that they would be the ones to attempt such a bold and ethically questionable project as cloning Picard to create a perfect replacement. The introduction of Shinzon in Nemesis built on themes that had been subtly woven into the fabric of Star Trek lore. The clone concept is more than just a sci-fi trope. It allows the show and film to explore deeper questions about identity and the consequences of playing with nature. For Picard, Shinzon is not merely an enemy to defeat, but a living embodiment of an alternate life path.